Today, Grace sits down with friend and colleague Behnad Honarbakhsh. Behnad is the founder of Fit to Train Human Performance Systems in Vancouver, British Columbia. From strength and conditioning to physical therapy, Behnad has worked with teams and athletes from the NHL, NBA, MLB, NFL, CFL, and MLS. On this episode, we discuss running a multidisciplinary clinic, finding your blind spots as a clinician, the impact of scar tissue on movement, and the importance of creating human connection with your patients. So let's get going with this episode of the Movement Podcast, powered by FMS.
Well, welcome to the podcast. This is a big day for me because I get to surf some conversations with probably one of our most distinguished allies in this movement journey. Behnad Honarbakhsh was introduced to me by Kyle Kiesel, and I honestly think Kyle just looked at me with not many words and said, the force is strong with this one. So since that day, Behnad has been the Jedi. And even though most of us in FMS that are instructors are his senior, he has been an equal since day one. And when we're solving cases in the corner and we have our own healthcare issues, the one thing that nobody is reserved in saying is, well, what's Behnad think? Because that's probably closer to right in the grand scheme of things. And the other thing I want everybody to know is that you've never told anybody how good you are. You just show them. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, Gray.
No. This is fun, and I want all our listeners to realize you have played every role in movement and fitness and healthcare that most of our listeners do. So tell our listeners exactly what your role is now, but then take them back in your evolution professionally and in exercise science, in physical therapy and osteopathic healthcare, and then right on up to what you've been doing the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, so I'm, the token Canadian on the FMS team. So I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, and simply because it's close to Whistler, which is where that's where my happy place is. Do a lot of skiing and mountain biking. So, anyways, I'm sort of the quarterback at a multidisciplinary sort of health and wellness hub here in Vancouver. And we've got about 14 clinicians on our team. And
is that like a freestanding mini facility, multidisciplinary facility? Because I guess that would be an upgrade. If I lived in Canada, I've got structured healthcare, but then if I want an upgrade, if I want access to a little bit more, I'm proactive, I'm the same person taking multivitamins, I come your way, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
we call this like extended medical care.
Okay.
So if you anything emergency, like if trauma or life-threatening, obviously you're going to the hospital and that's obviously covered. Your basic medical care is covered by your family physician, but anything like physical therapy, chiropractic, dental, for optometry, things like that. Most people have extended medical coverage, so either their work provides some sort of insurance on top of what healthcare covers. But yeah, so we're sort of an extension of the healthcare model, and people either pay out of pocket to be here or they've got some sort of coverage that covers it. And we've got about just over 4,000 square feet and about 9 private treatment rooms and just some big open space, which is what I like, with the equipment all on the side and lots of space for us to move. And we sort of, as this evolved, I realized that, we do need different expertise, on the same bus. So we've got physical therapists, chiropractors, massage therapists. We have a naturopathic doctor who helps us look at the chemical side of things. We have a Chinese medicine doctor, just a different perspective. We've got exercise physiologists, and I sort of play the quarterback, if you will. But we all, I always say, like, there's a lot of places that have different practitioners working under the same roof, contributing to the same rent, and calling it a multidisciplinary clinic where people can come and shop for different things. But they're the they're sort of driving their care. If they go to the chiropractor and it doesn't work, they book an appointment with a physical therapist, and if that doesn't work, they go somewhere else. Whereas we truly work together, and sometimes we have more than one practitioner in the room with a patient. Our clients see us interacting, on the regular, and obviously we've got an online sort of charting system where everyone has access to. If someone's prescribing an exercise or a vitamin, everyone gets notified, and really, I try to get away from being jack of all trades, master of none, and it's gotten to a point where I'm working myself out of this business where I just do the intake. And I go, okay, you need to go over here, you need to go over here, and you need to talk to this person and see me in 3 weeks when this is sorted. And so, yeah, we have a lot of fun. I dabbled in the professional sport world for a bit. I was the director of therapy for our hockey team here, the Vancouver Canucks. And it just, I guess I'm too naive to sort of play along with the politics, and I'm going to be open and frank here, and it just, I couldn't play that game, and I wanted to go and change the world, and a lot of people telling me to put the brakes on, and well, this is going to require more work and more effort, and so I quickly realized that this is where I belonged, and I still have quite a bit of impact with different athletes and teams all around, but I get to do it out of my own house, and they come to me, and we truly come to play every day. And we happen to get paid for it, but that's what I'm running. I'm the quarterback of a ship that's got a lot of different experts on it, but we all speak the same language and are sort of working towards the same goal.
Well, no, I want to share something with you. I'm halfway through a book called Second Strength. I think that's the name of it. I get those wrong sometimes, but basically, in the early part of our career, when we're running and gunning and trying to be an expert, be creative, and distinguish ourselves, I think they call that fluid intelligence. But there is a point where I guess I'm not going to produce original work anymore. I'm simply going to sort of crystallize maybe some of those screening and testing and assessment pearls that I've got and just learn to teach those better, right? There's a place in your I guess, career where you're developing and growing, and there's a place in your career that sometimes I think you don't feel like you're contributing when you're directing traffic. Without the hub of the wheel, none of the spokes work. And so even though you don't get to close cases, right, just like the rodeo guy, 8 seconds, put my hands in the air, I get my rush of adrenaline closing a case. But I also know you've arrived at that place where your 80-20 play says by the time you put them on the right direction, you've already closed the case. And you know perfectly well that you've got enough systems of checks and balances where if they're the 20% outlier, there's a complicating factor, or somebody drops the ball, you're also in a position to see that in a good enough time to do it. And I think sometimes that I was talking to Phil Plisky and Jenna on their podcast saying, talking to young clinicians about imposter syndrome. I'm like, I wake up with that every day. It never goes away. The day it does, you're an asshole. But you mitigate that and you reduce your own confirmation bias, not by, studying more. You create a system and feedback loops that we're all accountable to. And when you mention pro sports and your contribution there with the Canucks, I've felt that where I would much rather be a consultant to highly political, highly volatile situations than an employee, because one of the things that I think Lee and Kyle, Phil, Greg, we all recognize when we consult with a pro sports team is we try to create a standard operating procedure that will help them. And so if this is a pain problem, we've got to unpack it in healthcare. And if this is a non-pain problem, we can unpack it in a movement space, more like wellness and risk prediction. If this is a performance problem, we unpack it over here, and everybody stays in their lane. until the franchise player has a boo-boo. And now the franchise player asks the strength coach to run his rehab because he has a better relationship with the strength coach. Exactly. And that's not a bad thing if the strength coach knows how to play it and says, okay, I will participate, but Behnad's still calling the shots. And that doesn't usually happen. So when we're in a situation where the 6-year-old gets to decide who their teacher is, you don't have a principal, you don't have an educational system, you've got an entertainment thing with textbooks, right? And so
yeah, that's bang on.
Yeah, no, so I know you can feel that both on a professional and personal level, but don't ever discount creating a wheel, and then you'll never not have to play the hub. Until you create another you're going to have to distinguish yourself in a few spokes, but in the, I guess, the twilight of your career, being the hub of that wheel, you may not get the slam dunks that you get when you close a case or have a clinical breakthrough or activate somebody's core that's been asleep forever, or go upstream and find out, oh my God, you got food allergies. This is not a mobility and stability problem. This is an upstream inflammation problem. So be that quarterback as long as you can and realize that you're closing more cases than you ever did just by getting them on the right path, I think, you know?
You know, I got to tell you a story. So tennis is another one of my passions, and I belong to a tennis club, and that's where I go to, do my, gym training, right? So we have a beautiful sort of gym set up here at the clinic, but this is where I work. I kind of, try and get away from this space, and, the facility at the tennis club's right on the ocean. So you got, the visual stimulation as well. Anyways, I was doing my warm up and doing some movements, and obviously, like, people that aren't familiar with functional movement systems and the way we move, they kind of come up and ask questions and stuff. So for years, our clinic, it was all about like Behnad, like I want to go to Behnad, right? Mm-hmm. I was the brand, and I was working so hard to get away from that. I wanted people to come to Fit to Train, the clinic.
Exactly.
And so this guy walks up to me and he goes, hey, those are some interesting stuff you're doing. He's like, there's these guys in town. I think they're called Fit to Train. You should go see them. They kind of remind me of you. So that was the moment where I'm like, finally,
yes.
like, and my teammates were speaking my language, and they're doing, whatever they're delivering was sort of making noise outside of those walls. And that was, the moment where I'm like, we're on the right track. We're on the right path. Like, and especially when I was doing a lot of travel with you guys, often I would, I'd walk into the clinic and like, oh, you still work here? Oh, great. So I never forget that. And I happened to be wearing one of our T-shirts with our company logo on it. And as soon as the guy started talking, I just put my hand on there.
Let him finish. You want to see how this ends. No, I think that's awesome, because I do think sometimes that because our common bond in the systems we apply to the passion for movement we have, it's taken us international. It's taken us through language barriers and borders and stuff like that. And it's very hard sometimes to go back to your hometown and feel like, man, I just made a bigger impact in Japan than I made in my own zip code. Because you see the local high school doing stuff that we haven't done in 30 years just because they got a new coach and it worked for him once for 6 months. And so, I still remember when I first entered the NFL, if you were a middle linebacker, here's your workout, right? Because we looked at risk as only the threat of the environment you play. So if you're a defensive middle linebacker, these are the threats that can maybe make that position, knock you out of the game. So we train you for your threats, not your vulnerabilities. And a really good book I got through, written by Stanley McChrystal, was called Risk. And we've been talking risk management ever since we did this thing, because the one thing that I think you and I probably align on is I don't want to use my talents to fix preventable things. I want to use my talents to fix unpreventable things. And therefore, if I want to fix preventable things, I must go upstream. I cannot be a musculoskeletal assessment guru. I must be a musculoskeletal screening guru, because this means I can identify the problem before it causes harm. Because once it causes harm, I got to assign you a number. I got to call you a diagnosis, not your name. I got to call you an ACL, not Behnad, right?
Yeah.
And it gives me tunnel vision and conversations that I don't want to have yet, because you're going to make it all about your quad and hamstring, and I want to make it about your hip, your core, and your eating habits, right?
Yeah.
So
it's sometimes it's challenging to fit into that box where, insurance companies have different demands, physicians, only speak a certain language, and it is big picture, and it is whole person management.
Well, I wrote down some things this morning about the note that I was taught to write as a physical therapist, the SOAP note, the subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. And I was thinking on it this morning that 80 to 90% of all my dictation, handwriting, and all my checking the boxes and filling out the form was so we could have a medically based transaction. None of that language led me to transformation, to resets, to pivotal teaching moments, to the educational opportunity. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, the first thing we got to do is bring this person's confidence reality ratio into check, because a mind-body connection is your thoughts and feelings align. And if you fill out a survey about your movement and then I screen your movement, which one is closer to the objective truth? Your body will tell me things that your conscious mind's not aware of. So you can say, I got great balance. And then I can do a Y balance test. And your body will say, I don't got great balance. Well, the very first part of therapy is making sure your mouth and brain and your single leg stance are in agreement about your balance. And it sounds a little humorous, but cops do this too when somebody goes, I'm not drunk, and they say stand on one foot, and then they can't. And then the person will insist, but I'm not drunk, right? And so that's what a blind spot is. And we're not aware of our own blind spots professionally in our own practice, but personally. And probably the last 5 years of my career has been taking some of the crap I say on stage and really rewashing it over my life and realizing how many of my musculoskeletal problems are preventable. How much of my sleep has been broken forever. How much of my strength conditioning practices probably fit a 30-year-old's body more than a 56-year-old's body. And just literally learning how to, if these words are so important to say to others, you gotta recycle them through your life, not once, about every 6 months, because that's what the mind-body connection is. Are your thoughts and feelings aligned, and are your actions and behaviors really pointed in the direction you want? Because if you want better sleep, turn off the damn TV at 11 o'clock, and don't drink coffee after 3. So,
I mean, I can't even count anymore with my fingers the number of times a client has come to my office, we're doing the intake, and we never even get to the physical evaluation, because we unravel so much of these speed bumps and garbage along the way, where I'm like, you have no hope to thrive in the environment that you've created around yourself.
But I also think that I don't want our listeners to think you and I are trying to become nutritionists, sleep experts, or psychologists. I know what broken sleep looks like. I know what an inflammatory diet looks like. I know what bad breathing tests like, and I know what bad movement looks like. And I also know that if we don't have at least one upstream behavior modification and one downstream focus, so I think movement sits in the middle, right? It's a subconscious signature of your homeostasis. But we can look upstream to your life cycles, the eating, the breathing, the hydrating, the rest, recovery cycles. Find one thing. And then we can look downstream at your performance, your activities of daily living, and some of the burdens that maybe you wish you didn't have. And movement's in the middle of that. So we got, your performance and independence downstream, and we've got your self-care upstream. And I honestly think that you and I can change someone's balance before they recognize it's changed and without practicing balance, which means I think many of our movement indicators on physical exam don't necessarily need an exercise or corrective, as they need a, number one, is there a unified awareness of this? And secondly, you can't will yourself into a better movement screen or SFMA. You can lie that you don't have pain, but if you don't have balance, I can't implant a thought in your frontal lobe right now that's going to change that. And if your grip strength is burdened on one side, that's inhibition. And I do think that, unfortunately, both in physical therapy, athletic training, and maybe even some forms of healthcare, we see weakness and assume they need strength added to their life.
Yeah.
We see mobility problems and assume you need a stretch. A college freshman in exercise science could issue this stuff if that were the problem. So unburdening the system and letting it breathe and then seeing its deficiency, I think really allows us to take action. And this doesn't take much longer than the normal treatments we did. We've got a few spinning plates, but I never make somebody fix their breathing, their sleep, and their nutrition and hydration in a pass. I find the bottleneck and say, if we fix breathing, how many dominoes fall? If we reset sleep, how many dominoes fall? And I try to give people one lifestyle and one performance indicator and said, and we're going to watch movement. That's the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's, to me, it's always like you're trying to grow a tree or a plant, and you're planting that seed, and the soil and the sun and the water and all that stuff matters. And it's, I literally use these words with clients. I'm like, and if you have a tornado coming through your yard every day, I'm sorry, it's just not going to work.
I have a tornado coming through my living room every day, and we call her Xena. It's a cartwheel.
The princess warrior.
Yo, man.
How old is Xena?
Xena turns 11 on the 18th of this month. I'm cleaning my backyard right now because Mrs. Cook decided we need a bounce house and a sleepover in the backyard. Yeah. And I had all my paddle boards out, and I was putting them away for the winter. And by the way, I just bought a sweet dirt bike. You live in a postcard and you drive sweet, fast cars. You're the only guy when we travel, you don't just rent the car they give you. You rent the next car you might want to buy. And God, man.
Not even going to tell you what I picked up last week.
What do you got? I got
the new Audi RS6 Avant. 600 horse, 600 torque. It's a family wagon.
That's how you justify that. Your family needs to go that fast.
V8, family wagon.
All right. I think a lot less of myself, but Danielle allowed me to start restoring a 1987 Porsche 924S. It's got the Beautiful. 944, but I found it a little barn find, and it barely had 100,000 miles on it. So I'm basically get to be the guy in 16 Candles now.
Well, I know when my next trip's going to be to your house.
And you know what you're going to drive if you don't want to fly. So you could probably be here just as quick. But do me a favor. Take me back to Behnad, the exercise science strength coach, personal trainer, and give me about a 5-minute pearl for those people who've invested their time and talent in the fitness side or strength conditioning side of this conversation. And then give me a few minutes for PTs, and then give me a few minutes for physicians, osteopathic. Take us through your history, because I honestly think that you've got some pearls for people, and give us that right now. Yeah.
So, science always made sense to me, and human biology always made sense to me. And going through high school and university, I just tried to get the, organic chemistry and calculus and all that stuff out of the way as fast as possible. And I was just fascinated by, anatomy, physiology, and whether it was professors that just struck a chord in me, or my fascination and obsession with watching somebody, run in slow motion or throw or, do things that most human beings weren't able to do. So that took me to exercise science. And, I think most people have heard this story, but I came across functional movement screen and functional movement systems just out of high school before I was getting ready for my first year of undergrad in exercise science. And so I think something got planted in me right from the start. And the first time I, heard you talk, it just resonated with me. And I'm like, this guy is saying something that I have a tough time communicating, the way I feel about things, the way I try to do things or see things. So that was sort of the backbone of my, exercise science education. And I was always seeking more and more and more. And that's what I would say, university education just gives you a taste and a sample of what's there. But a lot of times, professors, again, not all, I'm generalizing, but sometimes they're sort of going to the same place, doing the same thing, and they don't have the time to get out and explore what's happening. And so I was doing a lot of conferences and seminars outside of my university education as an undergrad, taking out loans and jumping on flights. And, I got to admit, a few times I just checked off the fact I'm a physical therapist, even though I was a second-year undergrad, and nobody checked my license. I just, would show up to
they just
Minnesota.
Want your money.
That's right.
They just want your money.
I quickly realized that you don't have to actually show your license at the door. And so I got exposed to a fair bit before I even finished my undergrad. And by my second, third year, my profs were asking me to help teach some of the labs, and because they saw my obsession and, the way I was, bringing up discussions and things like that. So one of the best things that I did, all through my, career was go and see as much as possible in the field. And, I wasn't serving at a restaurant at night to make money. I was working in a gym, whether I was cleaning equipment or, supervising. And so I always ended up working in the same field as I was learning in.
I've used this quote many times, but Mark Twain said, never let your schooling interfere with your education. You can do both at the same time. And I commend you for that. But I wanted to bring this up right now because there is something planted within a BS degree in exercise science that is unbelievably incorrect. And the first university that fixes it, I will give them a campus visit and a free day with Gray Cook. Change exercise science to movement science, because the assumption is everybody needs exercise. And not everybody needs exercise. I think everybody needs a good amount of physical activity and a scaled amount of stress, because if 80% of your calories go back to maintaining your basal metabolic rate, 80% of most of your nutrients just keep you alive. That means the other 20% get to explore your goals and your passions and be given to your family and your profession. So how much of your movement do you actually need just to maintain a version of you? And then how much movement's left over to pursue what you want to do at Whistler or on the tennis court? We don't think about things that way, but it's almost like saying to physicians that all you need is pharmaceutical science. You don't need health science. You need pharmaceutical science, assuming that everybody needs a drug or supplement, just like we assume everybody needs exercise. If you pass a movement screen, if you pass our physical capacity test, if you ace a Y balance test, and if you don't hurt, I'm going to say, show me what you're doing, whether it's exercise or not, let me do that. But I think the assumption is we've actually let the language of exercise define movement instead of the language and acquisition of movement call upon exercise to make impactful changes where it should. And we all do that. I mean, You know, Moses gave them the 10 Commandments. They made a golden calf and decided to worship that instead. But exercise isn't God. Your own natural drive to move and thrive and explore the environment around you and make connections is what movement does. And sometimes exercise helps with that, and sometimes it doesn't. So change the damn degree, and I think we'll make a bigger difference.
You know, I think like when I was like looking for degrees, I mean, I ended up going to UBC again to stay close to family and Whistler. But I think like there was a program in Brisbane, Australia that was called Human Movement.
God bless them. It should be.
And you know, my degree was called Human Kinetics, and then they changed it to Kinesiology. You know, but you know, going back, you know, you start learning, and a few people pump your tires, and you think like you're standing on top of the world and you know it all, and then you meet somebody that, you know, says something that you're like, oh boy. And, you know, throughout my career, certainly realized the more I learn, the less I know.
Most people feel that way when they meet you.
Well, I feel the same.
Well, see, there you go. There's the imposter syndrome is part of what we all. Yeah.
But I think like what I've learned is just to like keep that ego in check. And sometimes there's a difference between being super excited about what you're doing and what you're saying versus like, this is the way and this is the only way. And so I've been, you know, guilty of that a lot throughout my career where, you know, I closed the doors and figured I've got all the tools I need. And, you know, I remember the days of like where, you know, core training and, you know, training those deep muscles and everything on the floor. And, you know, like we all went through it.
Right.
Until the next thing. Right. You know, as a physical therapist, I used to take, you know, a manual therapy course and then go do a needling course. And then, you know, and my poor clients and patients, they were just getting the intervention that I learned about the weekend before. And really that's, you know, how I ended up going to osteopathic manual medicine. But as a strength and conditioning coach, you know, like if I can give someone a tip, it's, you know, like see as much as you can, be open to as much as you can, and, you know, tools. And you've always said this, like I remember in your videos with Brett Jones, you know, the Secrets series, it was always like, here's a high tech, here's a low tech, and here's a no tech. So like at the end of the day, it's just, you know, were you able to shift that behavior? And, you know, going back to like, you know, sometimes lack of movement makes movement better. You know, sometimes just parking the car over and letting the engine cool down a little bit. I mean, there are weeks where when I stop like doing my exercises, you know, it's like my joints take a breath of air, and, you know, so it's, yeah, that's what I would say. Like as a strength and conditioning coach, I was very naive to like how much was out there, and you know, and part of it too was because I explored so much, and I thought like, here's me. I've traveled the world. I've learned as much as I could, and then, you know, then you learn the next thing, and you're like, oh boy, like, yeah, and you really, my journey ended up in the sort of medical world when I, out of frustration, from some of the, you know, physical therapists and other medical professionals that I was working with. And I kind of wanted to do it all. And that's why I ended up in the therapy side. It was never the intention.
When I was a young physical therapist, fresh out of University of Miami, Paul Hughes, lovingly and sometimes not lovingly boxed my ears every day for 3 years. It was like waking up and sergeant's pissed off again today. He's just coaching me up hard, but I deserved it. I was way cocky and way ready to do that. And he really made me a systematic thinker. As a strength coach, before we go into physical therapy, outside of FMS, what was a big influence on what you did, because FMS helps you see things clearly. But I appreciated Pavel and what I learned from kettlebells more because I realized, oh, he's not sacrificing movement quality to gain strength. Whereas I'd seen a lot of people who gained a lot of strength and they walk really poorly and they bend very poorly. And outside of the strength exercises that they do, they're not really a great example of human movement. So what are some of those other things other than FMS as a trainer, strength conditioning coach, that really helped you action movement once you had maybe a better lens?
Yeah, one that comes to mind is in my third year as an undergrad, I took a powerlifting certification course.
Okay. Where
this guy, he was, an ex-Olympic powerlifter, and he didn't have any, personal training or science degrees or anything like that. It was just, he was, I think from like Kazakhstan or something. This goes back a few decades here, but the way he, like, it almost like he understood the science of movement without actually being educated on it. And it was like by making mistakes, learning by doing, and I kind of smile now where people, jump into a training facility and lo and behold, within 15 minutes, they're, doing cleans and jerks. And this guy spent 6-7 hours of this certification course just cleaning house before we were allowed to touch the bar. And the process that we had to go through, and, going through the motions and just understanding what's needed. And I think half the class wasn't even allowed to do the lifts.
And, and what you're talking about is Olympic lifting, like snatch and clean and jerk, not bench press, squat, and deadlift, right? Yeah. No, I agree with the same thing. And I went to a Power Monkey fitness camp a few weeks ago, and these guys have taken the CrossFit message back to a level of expertise in gymnastics and Olympic style lifting, or true, what I would say is a demonstration of power in lifting. And Dave Durrani invited me over there, Olympic level gymnast with his partner who's an Olympic level lifter. And these guys have taken that fundamental CrossFit message that I don't think was that tainted and kept it from running out of the guardrails. They brought it back, because I honestly think that teaching good fundamental technique once mobility is present is all the stability you need. You just got to have that gradient. And I agree. When I went through my Olympic or USA weightlifting certification, Mike Gattone did the same thing for me. We spent more time on the broom handle than the bar, but when we got to the bar, we did not dishonor it.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. No.
So that was one that comes to mind. And honestly, like, as a personal trainer, I was never attracted to the, working on the aesthetic side of things, the bodybuilding side. I was always, I wanted to improve athletic performance. So, I was always hanging out around the track and learning from, old school track coaches, and, the warm-ups, the, all the little side drills that they did. And I used to do that stuff with my personal training clients.
Well, see, I'm glad you brought that up, because when a few fundamental really good lifts like snatch, clean and jerk, maybe some fundamental grinds like deadlift and carries, the next thing you're looking for is calisthenics. Yeah. Right? And that's what you get a lot in both martial arts and track and field. I got a lot of great ideas from Vern Gambetta, track coach or track background here. And when Brett and I did the Turkish Get Up project, we called it kalostenos, because that's where calisthenics come from, in the Latin or Greek, beautiful movement. And it doesn't necessarily mean without implements, but a lot of people think calisthenics is just body weight. Calisthenics was also, I think, weighted wands in Indian clubs at one time. But the fact that you identify both true Olympic style lifting as a fundamental, because it exploits full mobility and global stability simultaneously. And then these track and field warm-ups and calisthenics and even plyometrics, you blend those two things together, it's almost impossible to get a bad movement screen. It really is. Whereas if you start this isolation strategy like we get both in healthcare and bodybuilding, and you said something, good function is usually transferable to better looking form, physical appearance. But better looking form can now be gained without being functional. 300 years ago, I don't think it was possible. If you look good, you probably move good too. But we've got spray-on tans, we've got crash diets, we got liposuction, we got implants, and we got unilateral myopic training that can literally make you look good in appearance until you're asked to move. And so function has always been the biological drive to have good form. But you can hack that and get an aesthetic form without function. So I think function is upstream of form. But we experienced the same thing when a lot of our movement screening stuff was translated into both Spanish and Portuguese. We were speaking to personal trainers that were very early in the evolution of personal training in Brazil. And they said, our clients don't care about function. It's all aesthetic. The ones who can afford personal training services in our country are only worried about the aesthetic. And I'm like, then tell them this will get that too. It'll just last longer this way.
As a healthcare professional, most of your patients likely walk through your door already experiencing pain. The SFMA is your initial assessment and provides a differential diagnosis that leads to more efficient treatment. And now it is easier than ever to get certified by signing up for one of our SFMA live virtual courses. We offer SFMA Level 1 and 2 virtual courses online, guided by a live instructor who will take you through the entire process. You'll be able to ask our team questions in real time and watch instructors work through live models throughout the day to be sure you leave with a clear understanding and the ability to start implementing the SFMA into your own practice. And for a limited time, we'd like to offer our podcast listeners a special rate for this SFMA virtual training experience. Follow the link in the show notes and use promo code VERT22 at checkout for $50 off your virtual SFMA Level 1 or Level 2 certification courses. That's VIRT22, and if you bundle them at checkout, you'll save an additional $220 automatically. We look forward to you joining us. Now back to the show.
Take us to physical therapy and what that added, and then give me something other than FMS that really maybe helped you distinguish yourself as a PT once you saw movement different.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, going into the physical therapy side was sort of like out of frustration. And I was working with medical professionals that, I was at the Sports Institute in Malaysia, and these athletes that were coming back after injuries were nowhere ready to do the things we wanted them to do on the strength and conditioning side. And I wanted to just have the license to be able to cross that pain barrier and be on that side and be able to diagnose and do something about it. My goal is to just go get that license and then carry on and work as a movement coach, working on, performance and stuff like that. And God, quickly learned that there's multiple specializations in physical therapy, and you got cardio resp and geriatrics and burns and inpatient hospital-based stuff. And the physical therapy school I went to at the time was heavily hospital-based, and a lot of the professors that were running the departments, all the research was in cardiorespiratory health. And so quickly I'm like, what have I done? What am I doing? And, but got through it. And I actually wanted to quit with maybe less than a semester left. And then I got this student sort of placement or practicum, in Kelowna in the interior BC at the Sport and Orthopedic Clinic. And my supervisor was this guy named Roy Gillespie. Okay. He's, one of the, I don't know if he knows this, but he probably influenced my career as a physical therapist, the initial sort of start point more than anybody. So I showed up, and Now, let me backtrack. Most of my sport orthopedic placements, I would show up, the client would come in, we were seeing like 4 to 6 patients per hour. And, everybody had to get the hot packs and the TENS and the ultrasound, and, you rub down the area that was sore, and, and these are the exercises that you gave. Like literally go to that binder, flip to the knee section, and A to Z or Z or whatever. So that's what we did. So you're pretty much an operator. You didn't get to use your brain, and actually
you're a movement pharmacist. You're just dispensing something within the category of kinesiology where they pointed to and it hurts and the diagnosis corresponds with. So it's hard to have a knee diagnosis without getting quad exercises. Nobody's ever going to check L4, 5.
Nothing. And, and unfortunately, I had an FMS background by this time.
Okay.
So I was asking a lot of questions. And I remember one particular placement, I had a negative feedback on my evaluation form. And it went like this: student challenges supervisor. So I guess the lady didn't like the fact that I asked too many whys. Well, why?
Let me ask you this. You've been a supervisor probably as much as you've been a student, and you've been a mentor probably as long as you've been a student. Have you ever been challenged by a student, or do you usually have, hopefully, unless if somebody challenged me with a little disrespect, I'll give them a little bit of smackdown, but most of the time I have a kind and loving way of saying, listen, I'm calling your misses, and until you start calling your misses, you're not going to get better. Now, if this is too much friction for you, you're asking to be too good right now. So I'm trying to get you good, but part of that is a sense of both humility and respect. But you're welcome to question everything I do. But if I question you back, you can't get butthurt.
Yeah, no, 100%. I've had a few situations where the attitude's gotten in the way of the learning, and we've quickly resolved that. But anyway, so that was my experience with placements until I showed up to this last sport orthopedic clinic with Roy. And Roy, the first thing he said to me, he's like, look, this is your opportunity to learn, be a student and take all the time you want. And I kind of was like, whoa, is this a trick here? He's like, I'll cover all the patients that are because the goal was that you're going to take over my caseload for the next 5 weeks. But if you're running behind, and Roy happened to be contributing to some research with a professor in Indiana. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he was helping dartfish.
Okay, yeah. Camera-based analysis,
yes.
Movement captures, yeah.
Yes, so Roy was doing a PhD, I think somewhere in the States. Again, it's been a while, I can't remember where it was. So he had the video equipment, and we got to video people walking and moving, and I'm like, this is unbelievable. And he was, man, one of my best teachers, because not only he really facilitated learning the way learning should be facilitated. He brought out, the goods from me. And he made me feel like a partner versus I'm here and you're here. I'm sitting at the top and you listen to what I do and you do it the way I say. And he really kind of brought the love for physical therapy back in me. And at that moment, I'm like, I know exactly what I'm going to do when I get my license. And when I got my license, I decided that I'm going to operate the way I did as a strength and conditioning coach, meaning I got to have uninterrupted one-on-one for an hour at the least with my clients. And that was a big no-no in the physical therapy world, at least where I was from.
How can you be efficient if you do that? Well, you're going to close a boatload more cases quicker and free up space for new patients. So watch it for 6 months. It's actually more efficient. But if you watch it for a day, it looks inefficient.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the tides shifted a bit. Mm-hmm. But at that time, I'm like, I used to say I'm not smart enough to be able to like meet someone, diagnose them, treat them, and send them home with something that they can do on their own in 15 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, so I kind of set up a blend of what I was doing before to what I was now, allowed with the license that I got to do as a physical therapist. And, I became this guy where like, oh, when you go see him, you don't have to go as many times. And
how do we make money if you're not seeing them as many times?
Right?
I didn't say I'm not working. I'm still seeing patients. I just don't have to see one for 30 days to get their knee to bend,
Yeah. And as soon as people would come in and like, well, are you not going to do the ultrasound? Or are you not going to do the tent? And I literally said, well, the last guy did that and you're here now. So why don't we try something different? So that's sort of, going from strength and conditioning world to the physical therapy world is out of necessity and out of frustration for me. Mm-hmm. The fact that, I'm like, instead of bitching and complaining so much, why don't I go and actually like go through the ropes and see what it looks like in this room over mm-hmm. here. Mm-hmm. And I never looked back. And, I kind of, for a while, I sat in the middle and had one leg in the training world and one leg in the medical world. And people liked me because I could speak both languages.
Well, you're not stuck in a silo. You manage the ground in between two silos. And I wrote the whole business of movement for all of the work to be had between the healthcare silo and the fitness silo. Because all that real estate between those two silos is called wellness, and health doesn't really generate wellness, and fitness can't really work without it. And so health, we either got to make those silos bigger so they meet in the middle, or we've got to have a separate profession, the hub of the wheel, that kicks you back to healthcare until they get this crap right, or helps you on-ramp fitness so it doesn't hurt you while it's trying to help you.
And and as a physical therapist, I was leaning on probably 80 to 90% of my strength and conditioning background to sort of get the car on the road and see and test drive it. Right. And so my sort of advice for physical therapists or any kind of person in the medical side is, if you don't get the opportunity to spend time with people, go and learn from the trainers and the strength coaches, because I don't know a trainer that spends 10 to 15 minutes with their clients. They get to actually participate in the session and watch people move and make corrections and see what worked, what didn't. So I would say go and learn from the people that are actually in the trenches.
Yeah. Here in the States, I think people actually shell out more money for personal training and specialized strength and conditioning services. And obviously don't complain or they'd quit paying, but these same people for the exact same amount will really complain when their physical therapy deductible is somewhere close to that. And that's them valuing the service. That's not them telling you, that it's bad therapy. They're like, I have a hard time writing this check for you to give me a rubber band and tell me to go home, where this person actually, you know what I'm saying? So we've got to do that, because everybody in healthcare here in the States, you're going to get an angry patient because their deductible is so high. Well, number one, you picked that policy. But number two, I'd like to make even that burden worth it by how efficient and effective I'm going to be with your time and effort. And if you're complaining, it's just like when an employee's complaining about their salary, they're actually complaining about their job satisfaction, and a raise is only going to temporarily placate them. What they really would like is to feel valued more and be part of a team. You do need raises when you need raises, but a lot of that conversation has nothing to do with a percentage. It's got to do with value. For sure.
And it's interesting, going back to, school, I really appreciated and valued the thoroughness and the time they took to teach us evaluation skills. But it's interesting, as I saw, even myself, now I was fortunate enough, I had you beating into my head the fact that evaluate. If you can't, you're not measuring, you're not, doing anything with it.
Right.
But I see a lot of people go through school, and it's like, yeah, like the evaluation piece is the one that it's almost like, you know how stretching and mobility work gets tossed when it's like, oh, I don't have time for all this, so I got to do cardio and I got to do my bench press. It was the same thing. Evaluation as part of therapy was the first thing that's getting tossed out. And person was walking in with anterior knee pain, and it's like, well, why do I need to like check it? Because I'll just treat it as patellofemoral pain syndrome, and these are the protocols, and these are the modalities, and these are the exercises.
Right.
So, you know, like, and I think, you know, before I got into the habit of thin slicing and really like going right to the intervention, I ended up in the osteopathy world, and that's really what the big difference is. You know, the SFMA and osteopathy worlds really align in parallel. Like,
no, I'd had contact with osteopathy through Paul Hughes. I didn't even know what the word meant, and then I started seeing
bone
MD.
Doctor, right?
Huh?
Bone doctor.
Bone doctor, yes. That's going to do a lot of weird stuff at the whole other end of your body where the problem is, but it's still going to get better. Yeah. So down here in the States, DOs and MDs literally have the same training, and then DOs, depending on where they are trained here, get a little bit of that historical perspective. So I think the assumption sometimes, whether it plays out or not, is a DO is at least positioned to take more of a holistic approach, even in not in their specialty. Meaning, you would think if you're seeing a DO, they're just going to basically take a different sampling of you. And the second thing that frustrated me in my career is I get out there just like you. I'm hungry. I'm probably taking way more classes than I'm ever going to teach. At least I thought so at the time. And 99% of continuing education in physical therapy, strength conditioning, and even healthcare is guided at treatment, not assessment. Yeah. But when a soldier who's a distinguished marksman decides to go to sniper school, he already knows how to pull the trigger and load the gun. What he's getting ready to learn is how to aim better, and that's the difference. You already got gun skills when you go to sniper school. What you don't have is that unbelievable accuracy and aiming and consistency. So, you know, but when you look at where people want to invest their dollars, oh, I got to learn dry needling, right? Before you got dry needling, how did you deal with soft tissue? Well, I was doing a lot of manual therapy, and so dry needling doesn't need a different assessment than cupping or scraping or manipulation or other forms of soft tissue. They all need a unified body signaling. And you see which one of these modalities seems to cause the greatest amount of good with the least amount of side effect is really. But I think when I started looking into continuing ed, everybody who had a modality had a different way of evaluating that pointed you more to their modality than others. Now, I've got patients that are scared to death of dry needles. I got another way to get your popliteus moving.
Well, my wife doesn't like she won't even be in the same room as a needle. And I remember early on, you know, like I got my acupuncture training, and then, you know, the intramuscular stim or IMS here in Canada, dry needling. And she would always say, you know, like, no, like, you're not doing needles. Like, imagine if you didn't have needles, what would you do? You know, I think the only time she let me use needles was when we first started dating, like second date. And I mean, I feel so bad because literally came back from a day of acupuncture training, and I'm like, oh, let me try this on you. So she was just laying there.
I did the same thing, man. I did the same thing. So it's bad.
Yeah. So she calls me on it all the time, right?
Let me tell our listeners right now, boyfriends can get away with a lot more than husbands can. All right?
100%.
Yeah. It just is. That's just the way it is. You can't go back. You only get to have boyfriend status once with your wife, and it's not after you're married. It's before.
I've actually had clients come with their husband or wife in my office, and I say something, And the wife would turn to the husband, or the husband would turn to the wife and say like, oh, see, I told you the same thing. And I quickly say, look it, you're the husband. Like that's not going to work.
That's right.
You know, that never works.
Well, the reason, I think clinically, the reason you can't help your family members or your spouses, parents included, is you have zero clinical effectiveness with anyone who's seen you naked. It's a rule that you should apply. If a lot of people have seen you naked, then change your zip code, be a clinician somewhere else, So I don't know how a healer in a nudist colony has any success at all. But take us into the unique osteopathic path that you went down, because it's not the one probably people in the U.S. are familiar with. And give us a little insight into the way that you found alignment between the SFMA movement behaviors and the osteopathic path.
Yeah, so I was, again, signed up to take another one of these courses. I got the flyer in the mail, and it was the Burrell Institute Visceral Manipulation course. And I went and, I was in Seattle, Washington, and we're sitting there and, quickly realized, oh, this is going to be another course where, they're going to tell me like I can fix headaches and I can do this, and everything under the sun can be corrected with this technique that we're about to spend the next 3 days. And then I kind of looked to my right, looked to my left, and I think there was, a body worker on one side and an accountant on the other side.
Oh, wow.
So you didn't have to have any sort of like license to be here. And so that kind of took me back a little bit. But then as I, then I'm like, okay, you know what? Just you paid for the course, you paid for the hotel, just, listen. And as they went through it, I kind of realized, wow, like this is fascinating stuff, but I just have a feeling it must be part of a bigger system. And at lunch, I was talking to a classmate, and she's like, oh, like visceral manipulation is part of osteopathy. And same thing, I'm like, osteo what? Like, this is, I've never heard of this thing. So, go on our, friend Google and start typing away. And she's like, yeah, like this is osteopathy. And, I think there's, some really good programs in Canada. And, that's all I needed to hear. And ended up on the Canadian College of Osteopathy. And so in Canada, and I think in most of Europe, osteopathy, we're osteopathic manual practitioners. So in the States, you go through MD and then you pick osteopathic medicine versus allopathic medicine. Mm-hmm. So we're not doing surgery. We're not prescribing medication. But
do you order x-rays and MRIs?
You know what? In BC, mm-hmm. only a physician can do that, which is quite inefficient because 99.9% of physicians call me and go, what do you need? So what do you need and why you need it? Just tell me what you want and we'll get it done. So that's so their signature will cost healthcare dollars.
Well, the funny thing is we've had a lot of touches in the U.S. military, and on a military base, somebody's probably going to correct me if I'm wrong, but if a physical therapist needs an x-ray to do their job a little bit better and to close this case, hopefully without surgery or a lot of extensive rehab, they get it. They get an MR, they get whatever they need, because I just need a perspective that's going to help me decide how much of this is a structural problem and how much of this is a functional problem. And so it is an unnecessary barrier, I think, but it is what it is. But everywhere that I think government dollars are scrutinized, and the military is one of those, it's like, why are we going through 3 steps to, I get it.
Well, and when the client's in my room, they're paying out of pocket, but when the client goes to their doctor now to get that x-ray, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, that doctor is going to bill the medical system. And it's not like I'm going to get the image and read it. The radiologist is going to write the report that I'm going to read and, obviously look at the image as well. So I'm not making any calls. I'm just saying, hey, I need more information here. So yeah.
No, I had my patients come back to me and said, yeah, it said degenerative changes. I'm like, it never doesn't say that. I was making sure you didn't have a tumor or a spondylolisthesis or a stenosis. But it all, unless you x-ray a 6-month-old, it says degenerative changes. That's a normal finding for anybody who's been upright for 20 years. It just
yeah. And in parts of Canada, I think in on the eastern Canada, like in Toronto and Ontario, those areas, I think the physical therapists are able to order these images, and I'm hopeful that, even if you say the physical therapists or osteopathic practitioners that want to do this stuff, they have to get further education and then leave it up to the practitioner. Go take some courses and then be able to make that call. Let
me make one point that I hate to interrupt, but I honestly think that a lot of people in healthcare order lab results, x-rays and MRIs, CT scans, because they don't know what's wrong. Whereas prior to having all these testing modalities at our resource, you had to call the shot and you used the secondary diagnostic other than your own manual skills, history-taking skills, and patient interaction skills. So if I order an MRI, I think I'm going to see something that lines very much up with this physical exam, right? Or I'm trying to rule out something that would create a contraindication to what I'm getting ready to do. So I'm already calling the shot, right? Instead of just saying, oh no, let's get an MRI. That's not a good reason to get an MRI. A good reason to get an MRI is you build a case for ruling out something this could be or putting you closer to a prognosis that you can action. And I don't think we use those things that way. So it's a slippery slope. I know a lot of physical therapists would love to be able to order x-rays, but with that comes great responsibility. Don't abuse that. Don't use that. If physical therapists in the States got a musculoskeletal visit once a year for everybody who had insurance, and they got reimbursed an evaluation fee for that, I think a lot of PTs would do a musculoskeletal evaluation, not a lifestyle and movement screen. And if you're trained in, McKinsey approach, you're going to do a McKinsey exam and you're going to find exactly what you're looking for. And if you're very big into PNF, you're going to find what you're looking for. And that's why I think if we were ever given the unbelievable honor of interacting with an asymptomatic person simply to call risk factors, we would all get on our agenda wagon and our assessment preference, not on an arbitrary screen that is universally recognized as a movement signature of risk or not risk. And I think we all need to get there. So if we're ever given that well visit, I hope we don't abuse it and lose it within 3 years by turning every well visit into a reason to do more rehab, because that's not what it is. It's when a dentist cleans your teeth, they're not looking for a root canal. They might see one and have to do something about it, but they're here to give you 6 months of clear until they got to look in your mouth again. So,
yeah, and I've about 15 to 20% of my caseload is actually clients that are checking in.
God bless you, man. That's the way. Yeah. That's the way we get upstream.
And it's like, oh, you're transitioning from your road bike to the ski season, or ski season's done, you're going on the road again to run. No, for sure. I have clients, and I use that same dental model perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you got an annual physical, you go to your dentist every, some people go 3 times a year. I've got 15, 20% of my caseload that they're here at the latest once every three and a half months.
Now, I'm going to take you back to osteopathy. I truly think that the 2 things that I've been most fascinated by the osteopathy approach is they never look at movement in a vacuum. And our SFMA is a really good roadmap for mobility and stability global problems on the top tier and impairments recognized in the breakout. But just because we find those, I want all of our listeners to hear, we don't immediately go for a corrective if there's a visceral signature, meaning gut problems or previous surgeries to the gut or organ regions, or breathing problems. Because the one thing I think osteopathy, just like martial arts and yoga, has had since the beginning is they never separate the breath, the gut, and movement problems from each other. Because if you got gut issues or breathing issues, you will manipulate your musculoskeletal system to get as big an airway as possible. So if an anterior head posture person has a bigger airway in bad posture than they do in the posture that you'd rather see, guess who's going to win? The airway. And we don't think that way. So that's the one thing I want our listeners to do. And I think that very easily now, organ and gut health and breathing problems can drive musculoskeletal behavior. So you don't have to become an osteopath to have a breathing screen and to do a quadrant evaluation of the gut. And where could our listeners find a little bit of just, I mean, we got a breathing screen at FMS, but if I were going to do a question the quadrants of the gut with palpation and maybe consider an upstream driver, gallbladder, something like that, the history's going to take.
In the SFMA, as soon as you get into that lumbar lock rotation test,
yep,
where your hips are on slack, the lumbar spine is locked, a lot of that, I remember like when we're teaching the courses and stuff, like a dysfunctional movement in the lumbar lock is not necessarily a T-spine issue. First of all, you got to consider the ring, T-spine, the rib, the sternum, like all of it. But that's the cage. But also don't forget what's on the inside of that cage.
Right.
And a lot of like anterior torso tissue extensibility problems are visceral problems.
And isn't that another way of saying high threshold strategy? We see it from inappropriate training and we see it from visceral problems. So you can create this oblique high tone, TA pelvic floor low tone scenario to protect yourself from hostile external environments or hostile internal environments. And it feels the same on palpation and looks the same on movement. But if they're giving you a few key indicators of abdominal issues, females having pelvic floor problems, menstruation problems, bladder and bowel problems, if they're giving you all these things, at some point you got to consider that. And it's much harder, I think, here in the States to get a good visceral perspective of function. We take a visceral perspective of structure, right? And if we don't see bad structure, we assume good function. But you can see good structure in the gut and have chronic diarrhea, constipation, incontinence, painful intercourse, many things that look great on X-ray and ultrasound, but don't work that way. Just like a good knee X-ray doesn't mean you can deep squat. It just means you should be able to. And if you can't.
And it's like, people don't ask the questions either, right? Like, the FMS or SFMA, like that's like, third on the list. Like when you take your history, rule out contraindications, like people think I have 3 eyes when I ask, like, do you have any bladder bowel function problems? Are you bloated? Like, we literally go through, do you have headaches and migraines? You come all the way down the systems. And, a lot of athletic injuries lead to some sort of visceral dysfunction from a mobility standpoint.
Yes.
Hockey players, every time they are getting cross-checked, they're getting a shot to their kidneys. And the kidney sits on your iliopsoas. The iliopsoas is the rail, is the track for the train, the kidney being the train. So, and going back to our anatomy, the renal arteries are connecting these two things. And every step you take, they're supposed to go up and down and in and out. So people that are chronically coming with psoas strains or hip flexor problems or even back pain, a lot of times these are viscerosomatic driven problems versus somatovisceral, because the opposite can also be true. Having these visceral problems because of a musculoskeletal drive.
So what I'm going to try to do is make it ridiculously simple for my brain, but help. If you're having problems with your natural cycles, right? And we've got cerebral spinal fluid on a cycle, we've got bowel and bladder on a cycle, we've got menstruation, feeding, eating, sleeping, breathing. These are all cycles. If you're having problems with your cycles, there could be an internal driver. If your Oura Ring, your Garmin watch, and your lifestyle is going great, you don't have circles under your eyes, you're not hypertensive, everything's going great, then I do look downstream at maybe the way you're treating yourself in your exertion. Because we got a lot of athletes that their cycles are great, but they're doing all the wrong exercise and all the wrong training loads. And so they build armor for the outside insult as opposed to the inside distress. But if people are throwing out that their cycles don't sound normal, and it's easy information to get, respiratory rates, heart rates, elimination rates. And if people aren't sort of lining up there, you're not really diagnosing a problem as well as you are doing a full evaluation of the lumbar. Because I know a lot of people with back pain and the therapist never touches the front of the back. They only touch the back. And yeah.
I mean, the number of female clients that have had C-section scars that, complain of back pain for years. Yes. The number of spinal manipulations they've received, the number of injections. The latest thing is prolotherapy, and they're told they have instability in their spine, and they're getting upwards of 200 to 300 needles per session. Mm-hmm. And they come in, we go through our movement evaluation, isolate the problem to the front side, and start working on that scar. So now that their pelvis can actually sit in a position that it belongs to, there is the spine, especially lumbar and cervical, they're adaptive zones. Right. They take the beating. You got the skull, you got the rib cage, you got the pelvis, and you got these two rods in between that take an absolute beating. And their job is to level everything out. 4 or 5 discs, C5, 6 discs, and a lot of times, it is the front. We wind
back up, and even in this podcast, I catch myself and Lee doing it. We wind back up with this simple rolling around on the floor. It is something that always creates an aha moment in every SFMA course, and sometimes even an FMS course. Sometimes when we're doing the Y balance, rolling helps that too. And another good way to sort of appraise the situation, if you unburden the system all the way down to rolling, and you can sort of, I'm not going to say coach up rolling, because we don't verbally get people to roll. We do things kinetically and visually to get people to roll. And when we add an appropriate breath sink or do something to dump tension, and rolling returns, more often than not, I find a lot of external insults on the core, meaning when you're on your feet, you're abusing yourself, whether you know it or not. And it doesn't mean you're overtraining. It means that you can't handle being on your feet 8 hours without going into dysfunction. But when I don't see rolling and a few of our little resets restore that rolling behavior, I do start thinking inside, and I do start asking questions. And it's an uncomfortable question fit for anybody, but when I get to the point of C-section or pregnancy, the question I ask is, have you had a C-section, abdominal surgery, or what you would consider a complicated pregnancy? That usually opens up the conversation that'll allow me to maybe take a little healthcare license to say, when was your last exam for X type thing?
Yeah, no, for sure. And the number of, going back to, again, a female pregnancy example, the number of females that do a ton of core training after pregnancy that are continuing to have the incontinence issues, I can't run because I pee myself, I can't do this, and simply, and sometimes the C-sections aren't planned. It's an emergency situation where, someone's life's threatened, And the surgeon's not really kind of like it's not a plastic surgeon that shows up to make sure that scar is as beautiful as it can be. Like, they literally like put the thing back together. And, you know, and it goes beyond that. Like in osteopathy, scar tissues are at the top of the hierarchy. I'll give you another example. I had a
What? Tell me why though. That's a very profound statement, and I want to stay right here. Why is scar tissue such a big deal for an osteopath?
Let me backtrack. So in osteopathy, we look at different systems and layers of the body. One of the systems is the fascial network.
Okay.
Right? And all the fascia of the body are continuous.
Exactly.
When you have a scar tissue, it affects every fascial layer in your body.
Because it welds multiple layers together that should be sliding on each other. You've got, 8 layers of body socks, and they shouldn't be stitched together at any one point. They should network and slide. And I think the stechos have got sort of a fascial approach where they're not just mapping the fascia, they're looking at these points where multiple layers intersect. And if they are dehydrated or welded together in some way, you're making a contraction that's having an unnecessary influence somewhere else. Thus, you are your trigger and you can't get away from it.
Yeah, and just, lay a towel on a flat surface and just pinch one part of the towel. Every part of that towel is going to move. Yeah. And the bigger you grab a t-shirt and you start twisting your shirt, every part of that shirt is going to come onto itself.
Is this an appropriate anatomical statement that generally speaking, 20% of every muscle doesn't necessarily reinsert into the tendon proper? It feeds itself back into that fascial network. I think it's you can probably dispute it in some cases, but I would think the majority of muscles both influence a tendon insertion and a network influence. And if you look at the allocation of the distribution of fibers, it's about 80-20. So a muscle does have 80% influence on its intended origin insertion, 20% influence into the orchestra of other tissue tightness, I think.
I took the dissection course from Gil Headley.
Okay.
So it was a 7-day course. And pretty much you had a cadaver, and you got 7 days to dissect this cadaver. And there was, 4 to 6 people per body. And we dissected in layers, not in like parts. So the first day, we took the first day to take the skin off, and then the superficial fascia, and then we dove down. At some point, we dissected a line, like literally soft tissue, muscles to tendons. It was a continuous line from the back of the right ear, don't ask me why, but to the right testicle, right?
Okay.
And we laid this on the table, and you could not tell me where this came from. It was just a continuous...
But it was a continuous, uninterrupted fiber that was confirmed by anatomists to be a continuous, unified piece of tissue.
Yes. So
well, maybe that's if somebody were to
carve out the Eiffel Tower out of the body if you want.
I guess that's another way of saying if somebody grabs you by the balls, they've got your ear.
That's it.
They got your attention.
100% true story, and I've dissected it.
Well, I know we could go on forever, but we can't go on forever. What you have given us in your evolution is exactly the evolution that I think we should all go through, because we can't all be everything that you've already been, but we can learn how to refer better, network better, and appreciate better. I'm not intimidated when a non-healthcare person wants to look into the SFMA, because I think there was a time we used to assume that people would try to create a medical diagnosis without appropriate other differential skills. Now I just want strength coaches and personal trainers to know what a good orthopedic assessment looks like and how much they can help us recover this person. Likewise, I want physical therapists not to be intimidated by kettlebells because I think Turkish get-ups and neck patients are a great combination, but it doesn't have to be a kettlebell. It can be a tennis shoe or a sandbag balanced on top of your fist, but it's still an unbelievably good holistic movement pattern. So, as I said, we can't all be everything you've been because, dude, you're unique. But I honestly think you're not even in a position to refer to yourself now. You can't be the personal trainer anymore, but you have some personal trainers that are exemplifying some of those exact same drives that you did.
And, you know, like going back to your, you know, for a while, we thought, you know, well, having like trainers or strength coaches at SFMA courses was like, oh no, like they're going to go and do this stuff. But I quickly realized there's a lot, we were sort of going by the lowest common denominator, but I quickly realized there's a lot of great coaches out there that know their limits. And the more they understand on the medical side, the better they can refer. Those great coaches know what their limit is, and they would never cross the boundary. The idiots out there are going to be idiots. But, you know, I now take the perspective that they're few and far in between, whereas we have more great strength coaches on the, you know, training side that when they have a better understanding, I mean, I've got personal trainers doing top tier SFMA and sending those results to me with their clients and saying, hey, this is all I could do. I just now realize that this is not in my environment. It's a health problem.
Right.
So I think it's been great.
No, and I honestly think sometimes we don't shine enough attention on the top tier of the SFMA. And when I was sitting in my kitchen as a single parent, having just written Athletic Body and Balance, and Kyle Kiesel and I are working through the SFMA, and I basically looked at Cyriax's model of selective manual muscle tension assessment. Strong and painless, that is normal. Strong and painful, that's probably a soft tissue lesion somewhere. Weak and painful, that could probably be a major lesion, maybe involving multiple structures, including the joint. And weak and painless, I'm starting to think neurological. And I'm like, that's brilliant if all you've got is your hands in 15 minutes to know whether you've got a musculoskeletal or maybe neurological problem, you know, or that severity. And I'm like, what if we brought that to movement, but use the word functional and painful or functional and non-painful, and forcing myself, before I asked others to do it, to map all the dysfunctions that weren't symptomatic. Helped me realize that, you know, we've had the term regional interdependence for years. Everybody acknowledges it in an academic sense, but no one actions it in the 15 minutes you've got to unpack musculoskeletal after your history and before some of your intervention. And so I'm like, the SFMA rubs your freaking face in DNs that a DN in rehab is regional interdependence, and a DN at discharge is a risk factor. It just depends on what space they're entering.
I look at it.
Yeah, and so that really brings me to the way I want to wrap this with you, because we were handed the term musculoskeletal health. I wouldn't have picked that term because a lot of people sit under that umbrella thinking they're not part of the problem. I am part of the problem. But as a young physical therapist, I got into PT school before I finished my athletic training certificate. Therefore, under Virginia law, when I came back to my hometown to practice, I couldn't go to a high school and do anything like a physical therapist without a physician's referral. I had to wait till harm has occurred before I could intervene. But as a strength coach, as Lee Burton is my wingman, I could stick my nose in that locker room, in that weight room pre-season. And if I called what I was doing screens, not an assessment, you can't stop me. And I would develop friendship, camaraderie, communication, and accountability with the head football coach. And referrals weren't a problem when they needed me. But I said, I don't want you to need me as bad as you're getting ready to need me. I want Keith Fields to come over here and show you guys what good deadlifting looks like, because he's better at this than I am, and we're glad to help. We're going to be on the sideline if you need us, but I don't want you to need us for non-contact injuries. You're going to have plenty of contact injuries, and hopefully we can turn those for you really quick. But the word musculoskeletal health is only getting broader. And here's why. U.S. healthcare is now getting metabolic problems eclipsed by musculoskeletal problems. But really what's behind that is we're putting total knees in 40-year-olds. We're not telling them to lose weight. We're not telling them to exercise. We're not telling them to go through a course of rehab and see if you can avoid the surgery, prolong the surgery, or go into surgery much healthier, thus halving your rehab on the backside. We're simply throwing the knees in, but at the same time, we acknowledge that total knees have about a 10-year shelf life, and if you're 40 years old, planning on living much past 50, you're getting another surgery as you get older, and every surgery you have after 40 is a complicating factor to another health system, like a staph infection, or something like that. So as long as we could put total joints on Medicare, it didn't hurt Blue Cross, Blue Shield, or any other health carrier. But now that we're treating 40-year-olds like 70-year-olds, that's not a sustainable solution, and they need to know their options. But if you can't see a physical therapist or a chiropractor until you have a musculoskeletal problem, then musculoskeletal health care doesn't change musculoskeletal health. It only accelerates rehab in the best situations. So what we're seeing now is large companies and plants that may have a segment of physical labor hiring on campus or, in building physical therapy. But the people who could easily benefit from a well risk appraisal aren't going to go until they throw out their back on the back nine of golf, right?
Well, it's too late. Yeah.
So I need everybody in musculoskeletal healthcare to realize you can't change this from where you sit. You're going to have to figure out legal ways to insert yourself upstream in the conversation. And the best place to do that is athletics and fitness, because these people are already motivated to do a little bit more. And realizing that a movement screen can change your workout or change the way you train for your sport is a good influence. But if you think about it, FMS made it into pro athletics in the elite military quicker than any other population. Why? Because it makes a bigger difference, and athletics and war training are both accelerated environments where musculoskeletal injury is inevitable, but it doesn't have to alter the trajectory of your physical life, especially if we get upstream soon enough. And what are some things that you're doing in your position? I called you the hub of the wheel at the beginning of this thing, and I'm going to bring it back around to that. What are you doing within your clinic space to get to people, or even people who are just now learning that they have these options? Are you guys infiltrating fitness clubs, youth sports, school systems? How do you let them know that you're here to prevent more than just cure?
Yeah. So, a big part of what we do as part of our intervention is, education, like educating the clients. I always say, if surgeons fix things, I'm not fixing anything here. I'm facilitating this process. And, I make every single one of my practitioners spend at least an hour at the first visit. Heck, my initial intake is 90 minutes because I just talk so much. Right?
Me too.
But we planted right from the start. We've had so many companies come to us and be like, "Oh, we want to, bump up your Instagram. We want to do this to your, web search optimization, this, and advertise that." I'm like, honestly, we function based on word of mouth. you come and see me and I do something, and then you go tell your uncle and your brother and your wife and the neighbor and and we all go through this routine of like, hey, like, by the way, like, this could have been prevented. This is, and we go through the talk of like, well, you go to your dentist 2 to 3 times a year, and then we start to look in the future. Well, the ski season, like, this is coming. Like, what are your goals? What do you want to be doing? And also, we all know that previous injury is the number one risk factor for potentially what's going to happen in the future. And that's like telling someone who's had a heart attack, like, the next one's coming unless you change your behavior. And people want to sit there and go, what can I do? And if you listen to clients, they're always saying, what can I do so this doesn't happen again? And it goes beyond just do your exercises. I mean, I literally, when I'm prescribing something to people, like whether it's a lifestyle change, whether it's a corrective movement that they're doing, it's not like, oh yeah, by the way, do your exercises. Like, I make it life and death, like, take these like you wouldn't skip a dose of your antibiotics. Right. Because there's consequences.
Right.
And you just literally have to get people to the point of feeling the effects of the drug that you just gave them and how good it feels.
And, and I think the tools that you have contributed to and you help us teach are the feedback loops, because patients used to say, I bet you're going to ask me if I did my exercises. And I'll always do a cocky Gray Cook move and say, I don't need to. I'll know in a minute. And once they realize that level of accountability is among us, they may have some excuses, but I'm like, excuses aren't reasons, right? I use them too, and I have no right to do that. So I've painted you into a corner. If you do what I ask you to do, I've got a really, really high percentage rate of being able to measure a change for the better without a side effect in the other direction. See, if you closed a pain window but opened 2 DN windows, you wouldn't feel successful. I think a lot of people close pain windows but create dysfunction or put unnecessary limits on lifestyle and movement expression just so you stay asymptomatic. Every injury gets most people a slightly smaller life, but it's at such an aggregate incremental thing that all of a sudden you look up one day and you're 60 and you haven't skied in 10 years, but you still identify yourself as a skier. You ceased being a skier 9 years ago.
No, what I'm saying, the line I use is like, I literally look at people and say, I have 100% success rate when you do your part. So don't be a stat. Don't be that stat. Don't be that one person. And I've had like clients come in with their, husbands or wives or friends into the clinic, and the person that brought them in is advertising for me and saying like, if you don't do this, he'll fire you. He'll literally get rid of you. So honestly, it's like, one of the best jobs that I ever had was working at a sporting goods store. It's a chain in Canada called Sport Check.
I thought it was just called Canadian Tire and Battery because you can get everything there from your pharmaceuticals to your tractor implements, right?
Okay, funny story. Canadian Tire just bought them out.
Of course they did. They're Walmart.
Yeah. So at Sport Check, I don't think they do this now, but we had this, the company was called Forzani Group, and we had to go through this thing called Forzani University. Okay. So they actually taught us how to be salespeople and how not to stand and when a client walks in, say, hi, what can I help you with? Because what is the client going to say? When you go into a clothing store, when the person says, what can I help you with today? What are you going to say? Oh, I'm just looking.
Of course.
As soon as they say that, the door just got closed. That person can't come back to you and ask the question. So they'll say things like to us like, hey, did you watch the game last night? Something completely unrelated. Or I like your shoes. Or like, wow, this weather. Or something completely unrelated that catches people off guard. And so a big part of our role as health and wellness facilitators is to make that human connection my clients become a part of my family. I know all their birthdays. I know when they're going on vacation. I ask them, when they come and sit down on the second session, I'm like, first and foremost, most importantly, how are the kids doing? How was Thanksgiving? We just had Thanksgiving here in Canada. So you make that personal relationship. And that was a light that went off for me when I was in high school, and I went and shadowed a physical therapist that had been in practice for 46 years, a lady named Maureen Geldart.
Okay.
And Maureen was in sports orthopedics, and she had a older clientele, older population. She saw everybody, but the majority of people were in from mid 40s to mid 70s and a bit older. And when the person came in, now these were pre-COVID days, she would sit right next to the client on the examination table or, in front of them when they were sitting. And she would literally grab their hand and start rubbing their hand like your grandmother would. And they would have these conversations about the farmer's market or she just knew people. I'm like, oh my goodness. Versus this black and white, doctor walks in with a lab coat, buried in their clipboard. They're not even making eye contact with you. And I just realized and she didn't do that much, but the effects were incredible. So I've done more work on myself and human psychology, understanding behavior and personality and stuff. And honestly, when you get somebody on your team, they want to be part of the journey. And they're the ones that say, when can I come back? I feel so good. I want to show you. And so in our space, it happens from that first, we plant the seed and go, okay, this is where we're leaving things. Now I'm going to trust that you're going to take this plan and carry it through. And by the way, I want to see you in 2 to 3 months from now, or when the snow starts coming down, come and see me. I have a client that I've seen for 11 years. I have never treated this person ever. So what am I saying? He's come in, he's done a screen, he's gone away. 3 weeks later, comes back. I had to push him to 8 weeks. I'm like, Rob, I don't need to see you, and everybody at his tennis club knows that, oh, there's Rob doing his Behnad.
You're actually a service. But what I hear you telling people is we're stuck in this social media marketing of our services thing, but that's literally what was laying on my heart when I started the business of movement. And Lee and I unpacked that book in a previous episode, but it's expertise isn't just about knowing the evaluation and the treatment. That should be your default so you can connect. So what I hear you telling us is, close cases kindly, deliver the goods kindly, and let people know who are already impressed with your service of your accessibility. Paul Hughes did this a long time ago. He had these cards he would give people on release or discharge, or I'll see you in 6 months, but here's a card. It didn't give them a discount in services. But if they wanted to share, word of mouth, he called it care enough to share, it would give them, I think, a discount just on examination to remove that barrier of friction, to say, I see you limping, or I hear you complaining about your back. I got a guy, and let me make it a little easier for you. So it wasn't a business card. It was care enough to share. And Paul would say, you probably have somebody that we can help. Hold this as long as you want, but when you see somebody who's sitting on the fence, use this to knock them over. And it was a subtle thing, but I really think that if I had to invest in my marketing budget or pay myself to sit with a patient an extra 5 minutes, I think the 5 minutes would pay off. It's the same money. I think the 5 minutes would pay off better. And that's what I hear you saying too. So the reason we have our systematic structure, our SFMA, our FMS, all our other tools, is so you can use those as a craftsman, but the art is in relationship.
And a lot of our clinicians here, they're like, hey, shoot me an email if you have any questions or concerns, or, anytime we have a few seconds or minutes here and there, we'll just I personally, when I see somebody for the first time, I make a reminder in my note. In 3 days, I will contact them. Hey, just checking in. How are things? Let me know if you have any questions. Hope you had a good weekend. No rush. Just get back to me. And I just, and I realized, oh my goodness, so I just picked up a brand new car. There was contact made 24 hours later by the salesperson. Just checking in. You're still enjoying your new car.
Yep.
There was an email sent 48 hours after.
Yep.
There was a survey sent 6 days later. There's so there's this is not the end of our relationship.
Right.
And a lot of people assume unless I have an appointment, I don't have access to this person. And now that will take up a little bit more time, but you get so good and efficient at it that, it's just second nature.
No, it actually puts you ahead of the game, and just a little level of transparency. Since midsummer, I've been dealing with quite a few medical problems, and it's my own business, but the place that I've been going through to get all prodded and probed and tested and scoped and everything makes me reintroduce myself every time. They are more concerned about my birthday and my social security number. I have zero access. I have slow feedback, and I really don't get any education. And I'm not being a squeaky wheel. I'm getting on the conveyor belt. I'm letting them treat me like a widget. I'm getting in line because I know on the other side of that, they're collecting information, and that's going to be shared with a physician that I actually respect. But I don't want anybody on this podcast, whether they're in the fitness end or the healthcare end, don't be part of that problem. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, go be a patient somewhere else right now. And we will create a medical or fitness reason to have a transaction with you, but no transformation will occur in you, which means that they're checking boxes. You're checking boxes. You're 50 years old. You got your colonoscopy. Let's not check boxes. The entire world is checking boxes. They make you talk through a portal. They get back to you slow, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. But hopefully you're seeing bits and pieces of what Behnad's doing that have gotten him on this podcast, and is the exact same reason a lot of other people will never be invited here. So I don't want to close it like that, but you never lost your humanity, your compassion, your empathy, or your kindness. But I also think having all that stuff and not being systematic and not being a sniper is equally bad. I didn't come here for a best friend, but I found one. Right. So I know a lot of people are so open and easily accessible, but they're not closing cases. So close cases, deliver the goods, but distinguish yourself on the other side of that systemization, I think is what you're teaching us.
On.
Yep. Well, man,
go
ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add, our bodies are the most important things we have. Imagine walking on the street and just grabbing a hold of someone's leg. You just met them. You'd be tossed in jail. But the same thing happens at our clinics. You meet someone for the first time and you're grabbing their leg. So it's the highest honor. And, I think there's got to be that extra layer of respect, and I'm getting to know you and I'm here for you. And I just feel like that'll just bring down the wall, the barrier in between, and
well, you appreciate the level of vulnerability, and you also take the time to earn the right to interact with that. And my entire summer experience in this healthcare that I don't want to be has not acknowledged my vulnerability or my fear or anything. And I suck it up. I know how to deal in harsh environments. That's not hard to do, but I will never refer there. And as soon as we're done with this course, I will never go back. There are way more options. Now I'm invested and I'm going to get through it, and I'm not going to be the difficult patient, because it's like, yelling at your waitress. You're just going to get her to spit in your food behind scene. It's not going to make anything better. She's just going to, stick her thumb in your coffee. So, but no, one last thing. Any good books that you've read that we should add to our list this summer, or any good trips we should take that would give us an equal amount? I know I got to come see you and you got to come see me, but for our listeners, what do you got that they can have as a takeaway other than all this wonderful pearls in practice?
I don't know, probably completely unrelated to our field, but I'm reading Trevor Noah's book called Born a Crime. And it's, wow. Like, you want to talk about human touch and, moving someone. Yeah, like highly, highly recommended.
He's a smart guy, and I honestly think that he's taking a very sensitive subject and adding intelligent humor to it, and he holds a mirror up to society. We can't fix the problem he came through, but we can sure not cause it again, right? Yeah.
No, so that's the book, and I had the absolute honor of, I turned 40 this year, and I'm a big tennis fan. So my wife surprised me with a trip to the French Open in Paris.
Wow. All right.
Roland Garros. So did that, and then I got hooked on the Grand Slam thing. So I was in New York for the U.S. Open, with Serena packing it in. And those are my two trips that I went on. And I'm off to Tokyo to deliver your message at the end of November, Gray, doing a SFMA level 2.
Well, we're in Tokyo a month before, so I'm gonna be your opening act this time. So
yeah, there you go.
and by the way, Andy shared this with me back when the Venus and Serena movie King Richard came out about their dad. Did you see that?
Yes, of course.
About 3 years after that movie ends, because the movie ends with Venus getting her contract with Reebok, right?
Yeah.
I was down there at West Palm Beach as a part of Venus's Reebok entourage doing a movement screen on, I think, an 17 or 18-year-old Venus. And King Richard basically said, "What are you going to do for Serena?" And I'm like, "Well, I work for Reebok. She's got a Puma contract." He's like, "If you work with one, you got to work with both." I'm like, "Doesn't matter to me. I can screen two people almost as quick as I can screen one." And I looked at the Reebok handlers I had and said, "Do you mind?" It's like, "No, if this is the way to get it done." I'm like, "Because we're going to need Serena to do some of this back and forth we're going to do anyway." So I got a chance to movement screen those two girls. And the two keys that I walked away with, I'm sure glad they didn't play a lot of junior tennis, and I'm sure glad they hadn't been in the weight room all this time, because I would have found way worse screens with unnecessary competition or unnecessary kinesiology. Let these girls move and play. And one other question about your tennis game: open or closed stance?
I'm an open stance.
Can I offer one tidbit? Because I guarantee you could kill me in tennis, but one thing I've done for open stance, maybe power players, is find a player that you can handily manage and disadvantage yourself with two-hand closed stance, both forehand and backhand. And then in the very last part of that challenge, only go power open stance when you absolutely need it, and it'll be like taking the leg weights off. But if I really want to get your leg, if you never want to come in my gym and do med ball throws, chops, and lifts, just go disadvantage yourself with closed stance, Bjorn Borg, two hands on the racket both ways. Even get a racket built that gives you a comfortable double grip, and disadvantage yourself. Let somebody who can't beat you have the pleasure of beating you, and then you beat them with a disadvantage, and watch the competitive advantage it gives you. That's
so interesting you say that, because I was hitting with a pro on Saturday, and he wants to move me to a closed stance.
I'm not doing it.
You got to try.
Yeah, I'm not doing it to. We're going to get a durability factor, but it's going to give you a perspective, because if you start that way, you're going to telegraph to most players a disadvantage. Because think if you're on the other side and you see a guy playing like that, right? You have no idea he's got nitrous oxide in the passenger seat. It's coming, but if you can switch from a power position to a very functional, leggy, closed position, one day you're going to shred your legs and one day you're going to shred your core and arm. But I've done it with a few pros that have come my way. And I don't know any more about tennis than I do golf, but I do know a way to create a self-limiting situation that keeps you out of a lot of functional exercise and puts you back into functional tennis.
I love it.
All right, brother. I love it. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure, and you inspire me, and good God, man, thanks for doing what you've done for us.
Thank you so much, Gray. Well, I got to say the same thing to you. So it's been an awesome journey, and I look forward to many, many more years.
Well, God must like you because you live in a postcard and you drive fast cars. So, but thanks again, man.
My pleasure.
That will do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast.
Thanks for listening. And if you liked what you heard, please take a minute and subscribe and review.
If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your own movement journey,
visit us at movementpod.com.
Until next time, be sure to first move well,
then move often.